model context protocol built by our friends at Anthropic. And then recently, Postman came out with some really cool features around this. So break it down. What is MCP and why do we appreciate Postman?
Yep. I think if you think about MCP, like as soon as we have tool calling, and what tool calling is basically the ability to model or the LLM to interface with the rest of the world by calling a function, right? So you have tool calling, and it's been around for a while, like couple years. And if you really want a model to be more intelligent, do real world tasks like a human would, then you need to give it access to different systems. Like for example, if you wanted to make a ticket reservation, it needs to be able to look up available flights from Boston to New York, right? So to be able to do that, it needs to interface with your ticket system, right? That looks up the available flights and whatnot. So that's like one example. And then if you broadly generalize this across like a series of use cases, it could be looking up users in your Google workspace. It could be searching the web. It could be, reading a Jira ticket. Like it's endless, it's infinite, just like APIs, right? So how it typically works is the world up to this point before MCP has functioned off of APIs. So browsing the internet to look for tickets between like two paths, it's really, there's an API that gets you the ticket path, the ticket information, or the reading a ticket, right? There's an API for that. So if you marry the two, like MCP gives you the ability to convert, essentially expose a set of tools to the model that it can call, and you have the responsibility to write the implementation of those tools. Now what Postman has done is that they have 300,000 plus collections of publicly available APIs like Stripe, or you name it. Like they have collections for those that you can use right away and create Postman collections, and you can test them within Postman, right, for API testing. And clearly they live in the same world. Like MCPs need APIs to work, and vice versa, if you want to use LLMs. So what Postman has done is given you the ability to create MCP servers from like one click, and it's a no-brainer. Like Postman has all of your API definitions. Models eventually use tool calling as a means to call an API. Postman married the two, came out with the ability to set up an MCP server if you have the API. And what that means is if you have your own API, you're no longer limited by having to understand what MCP actually is, figure that out, build an MCP server, stand it up. Postman is making that easier for you. With the click of a button, you now have an MCP server. You can hand it to an agent. And what you can do is, like, for example, most often you have like a backend API and like a front end, and the front end is hard coded to call the backend, right? But now because you have an MCP server, you can have an agent that acts as an interface. So you do have a GUI based user interface, but you now have this agent that has no hard coding, that has access to all of your APIs, right? And it's also, because it's Swagger based and the agent is smart enough, it can figure out how to call the API. So if you have a sequence where you first need to authenticate with something, get a token back, pass that to some other API, the agent can figure that out. Or you can do that with a small amount of prompting. And now without spending like months doing this, in a matter of days, you have an alternate interface where you can chat with an agent and it will call your backend, which means you can build things like Slack integrations. You can build things like integrate with GitHub or Jira or whatnot, right? Because ultimately, your LLM agent knows exactly how to work with your backend, and the backend is where possibly most of your business logic is. So this is like a groundbreaking thing for application builders. Just because all you need to do is get the API correct, and all of this MCP stuff, if you don't want to get deep into it, Postman will solve that for you.
And we've been hearing about like this UI shift where everything's going to be chat based, but it hasn't happened because chat so far has been chat with an LLM, bring some documents in, but you couldn't do anything. And this takes away that constraint.
Exactly.
And everything that is a backend service can now be delivered vis-a-vis a chat experience with just a small setup.
Yeah, exactly. So we talked about the customer support use case a lot, and what we've seen is that the moment you ask for something complicated, it'll say like, let me get you an agent.
Like a human agent.
Human agent. Human agent. Thanks for that. But now, because your API is an MCP, say for example, and it's sandboxed, Like your MCP is within your premises, and then the agent is just relaying the commands.
Yeah.
You're executing them, given that security assumption.
Yeah.
You can now ask the chatbot to do things, and you can only expose commands that you trust the chatbot to reliably execute, and it will do those for you.
Yeah.
And that is a meaningful save of both the customer's time and your cost basis
Yeah.
in just one specific vertical. But you can use this to build a lot more complicated experiences. Like even what operator does for you, where it's like searching the web and doing things, like ultimately it's calling a series of APIs. It's
Yeah.
like handling the GUI, like that's like a much more complicated use case with more tools. But it all comes down to how effectively you're able to channel the APIs to the LLM,
Yeah.
make it more understandable.
Yeah.
And this use case just simplifies that. So it's no longer like a multi-month effort for some developers to break it down and make it easy for the LLMs to understand.
Yeah. And when you combine the ability to bring that into a chat experience with memory,
Right.
which we've seen a lot, ChatGPT specifically has done a much better job with memory. You're now able to do much longer running tasks between that agent interface because you're not reliant on just the context window to hold all the information that you're solving for with all these backend services, and you can get a lot of like work done.
Right. I think memory has a very interesting implication, especially for personalization.
Yeah.
So what ChatGPT is doing is it's trying to understand who you are and how you work.
There's a lot of flavors to achieve this.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then if you put in MCP into the mix, I think ChatGPT wants to evolve into being like your personal agent. The
Yeah.
fact that they're trying to get into iOS and integrate more natively with Siri and things like that. So for them in particular, this is immensely valuable,
Yeah.
right? Because they ultimately want to be a platform that others can hook into. Like
Yeah.
OpenAI is not going to be able to reliably solve like the travel use case. Like that's probably going to be an Expedia or Trivago or whoever wants to do it, right? So having an open platform where you're even enabling the developers at Expedia and some of these other companies to come up with the MCP versions, MCP-fied versions of their tools faster. All they have to do is get onto Postman,
Yeah.
and then they've enabled everyone that uses them to have access to an MCP tool that they can deploy in the chat experience of their choice.
Yeah. And what does this mean for enterprises that have a bunch of custom tooling internally that they want to give Blitzy access to in the VPC? In their own VPC.
Yeah, that's a super important use case, right? So like we've pioneered like infinite effective context. As of today, we're using it for code. We're expanding that to infinite information context because when you build something, you need to have context across multiple sources. Now, the enterprises that have been able to get in early to the modernization waves, and they have already built their stuff where it's hosted on, like, let's say in the cloud or on different servers, doesn't matter. But they want to bring that information onto Blitzy and give it that context, right? But it's been hard historically just because, like, how do you build that interface? Like, how do I take my developers off things that they're already doing and assign it just for this? That just complicates the challenge. But with this, it's highly likely that the enterprise already uses Postman internally.
Yep.
Right, for example. So if you're able to, and even if you don't, like if you're able to create MCP servers, which is a starting point, it's a widely adopted protocol that everyone is using these days, and you're able to MCPify your stack either with or without Postman, then you can bring and expose that to Blitzy, and then let Blitzy use that as additional context, right? Like let me retrieve information from Jira, for example, that you have custom, or some internal service that queries some dashboards, right? Or like queries a database and gives you some information. All of those are immensely valuable small use cases that when you combine into like bigger deployments or bigger application, situations, you can get a lot of value out of them without necessarily increasing the amount of effort that you have to put in to achieve it.
Yeah, it's like we are that much closer to giving these systems all of the relevant context that they need to be exceptional because their intelligence is good, post-processing is great, and context is all they need.
Yes, precisely.
Awesome. Fun one, man.